Hello, I'm Ben Kingston-Hughes, the Managing Director of Inspired Children, and I'm here to give you a really quick rundown of some of the amazing neuroscience of tummy time. Now, even the name tummy time sounds frivolous and silly, doesn't it? And it's easy to see why this time in a child's life is undervalued when compared to other times in children's lives. They're not writing, they're not reading, they're not even speaking. And that seems to be what we focus on in terms of all those academic achievements we want from our children. But as you're learning today already, that tummy time, that brief moment in a child's life, is one of the most important developmental times that they will ever experience. And it is a real shame that it is so undervalued. And in fact, people who work with babies tend to be the least paid and least valued of anybody that works with children. So when we look at the brain of a child, the reason we don't really focus on tummy time is because they're not doing all of those things that we want later on. You know, they're not doing that much maths as a baby, and they're certainly not doing any speaking. No baby ever comes out of the womb going, well, mummy, I've had a nightmare 9 months, and if daddy sings that song about an elephant one more time, I'm going to lose it. And there is a simple reason for this. Babies' brains, without being insulting, are a big ball of mush. They are smooth surfaced, mushy organs. They don't have all that structure that we have in later life. And in fact, they're a third smaller than they're going to be in adult life. So they're significantly smaller. The reason they're smaller is that they don't have as many connections. Now, if you know your brain science, connections are when neurons, brain cells, connect to other brain cells. And that's what learning and development is. So one of the things that everybody seems to forget in education, when children learn, they're actually changing the fundamental shape of their brain. And that's going to enable more learning. And all it is neurons connecting. Well, if you look at a baby's brain, there's barely any connections. They've not made those fundamental structures for all the other stuff that they're going to need. And in the first few months of life, the baby is making those connections at the most accelerated rate that they will ever go through. It's never going to be as effective or as fast as it is then. And it's not just the first few months. In fact, if you look at the babies as they grow throughout their early years, their very early years, that's when brain growth is at its absolute fastest. So the first 2 months are critical. The first 6 months are critical. But let's be honest, the first 2 years and beyond are incredibly important for growing the child's brain to the full-size brain they're going to need as an adult. And we know that brain growth is what's called experiential. That means it's the experiences of childhood you have that grow the brain to the correct size and shape that it's going to be. And that's really important because you can't leave a brain alone in a dark room like a mushroom and expect it to grow. We know that simply doesn't work because we've seen experiments in rats and other mammals, but also that's been backed up by studies of abused children that have shown that when they experience deprivation in that way, their brains simply don't grow to the correct size and shape they should. And that's really important for tummy time. Because knowing that brain growth is experiential, that means that babies need the broadest range of experiences possible in order to grow their brains to the correct shape. And tummy time is one of the key physical explorations of the world that is more neurologically rich than almost anything else a child will do. It looks like a baby just lying on a floor gurgling and grinning, but actually it's building the brain in a way that almost nothing else does. And all the way through early childhood, physical movements and physical interactions with their environment are vitally important for the building of the brain. And actually, there's studies of children in primary school showing that if they've not moved enough as babies and in early years, it has a knock-on effect on all of their other development, most notably communication and language. And that's because babies need to move. It's through those early movements they start to create neural networks. Now, a neural network is just lots of your brain working at once. And these neural networks are important for everything we ever do in our life. Neural networks for problem solving, where you're never just using one bit of your brain, you're using lots of your brain at once to solve a problem. That's simple problems like, how do I reach that rattle over there? I really want to reach that biscuit, right up to Einstein solving the problems of the universe. We need neural networks, and we begin to build them in very early childhood. And tummy time is a key way in which we do that. We've got two sides to our brain. We've all got two hemispheres. They need to work together. And in order to do that, they need to communicate with each other. And one of the ways they do that is the simple movements of a child learning to crawl, lying on their belly and exploring. Because every single one of a child's limbs is attached to a different side of their brain. It's controlled by a different side. So when that child is learning their early coordinated movements through tummy time, they're actually activating both sides of the brain simultaneously, and that's strengthening all of the links between the two hemispheres that are ultimately going to lead to that complex problem solving, to language, to mathematics, to all of those things in later life. And it's tummy time that starts that process going. Because another thing people forget about education is that all of the higher academic skills, the maths, the reading, the writing, the speaking, none of those are hardwired into the brain. They're not built in. You have to build physical structures in your brain for them to be effective. And if you don't build those structures correctly, then you're never going to be as good at maths or English or speaking or literacy or all of those important things. Well, how do you build the structures? It's through those early movements and early interactions, those wonderful nurturing moments during things like tummy time, that you set the groundwork for the entire rest of the child's life, even the academic skills that they're going to need in later life, the skills of reading, writing and mathematics, all the foundations for which are built right at the start, right through those wonderful moments of play with your parents or with other adults, and that wonderful tummy time moment. That's building the fundamental structures you're going to need for everything else that you might need. So brain growth is experiential, and it's very much on a use it or lose it basis. In fact, there are studies that show that if you use pathways in your brain, if you use the brain like it should be, those bits grow. We know that. But the same studies are showing that if we don't use the bits of the brain that we're supposed to be using in early childhood, they actually die away. They begin to be pruned. And actually, it's not just that they don't grow, but they actually start to sort of die away, not being as effective in later life. So it's absolutely vital that our children have as much of those interactions, and the real life interactions, that is, with the parent and the child, not the television screen, because we know the television screen can't do the same level of brain development anywhere near as much as simple face-to-face play with a parent. But also it's vital they do those early movements to change that brain from a big ball of mush to the wonderful full-size adult brain that they're going to need for the rest of their life. And it all starts with babies and tummy time. And one of the other things that we find is that there are criteria for healthy brain growth. We know this. So there are things children need. One of the key ones is an enriched emotional environment. That means they need to be nurtured and cared for and loved for their brains to grow. And actually a shared moment of tummy time with a parent is a really powerful way of building that child's, obviously, their self-esteem, their confidence. But people forget that bonding, that nurturing is also building the brain. The other thing is enriched physical environments. Children need actually to be able to explore from a very early age. They need that multi-sensory exploration of the world, the reaching, the stretching, the rolling, the developing, all that physical stuff, and that actually builds the brain. But there is another criteria that's needed, and that's a biochemical criteria. And there is a wonderful biochemical, which you may have heard of, because it's getting quite important right now in adults. It's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a great name for a chemical because brain-derived means made in the brain. And neuro means brain again, trophic means growing, and factor means, well, stuff. It's made in the brain, brain-growing stuff. So now you know exactly what it does. It's a fertilizer. It's like baby bio for the brain. Without it, our brains won't grow as big. This stuff has to be produced in early childhood for us to reach our full potential. And in studies in mammals, it's only produced in significant quantities at 2 times. Not watching a screen, not sitting staring into space, but exploring your world and playing. And what is tummy time if not exploring your world and playing? And if you've got a nurturing adult as part of that process as well, that's a triple whammy of some of the most powerful brain growth you'll ever get in your life. So BDNF all the way through our lives is responsible for adult brain health, but in childhood it's actually responsible for growing the brain. Also, incidentally, if babies have been through trauma or anxiety, and that may well be the case with some of the babies that you work with, BDNF is a key mitigator of stress. It's a chemical that actually helps the brain calm down and helps the baby overcome the damage caused by their anxiety and stress. So in short, it's a brain growth tool, but also a brain healing tool. And you produce it as a baby when you explore your environment and when you play. So tummy time is vital for the brain growth of every child that we work with, but also for their emotional well-being and their literal brain health, because it produces the exact chemicals that are needed to make the brain more healthy. So I could go on all day about the neurological impact of play and of tummy time, but I'm going to hand over back to Katie because there's so much more about the practical stuff that we need to learn. But if anybody wants to take this any further, please come on other training that we put on, or do keep an eye on our YouTube page for little snippets like this that give an idea of just how important simple moments of play are for our children. And also watch out for a new book that I'm just getting published called A Very Unusual Journey into Play, which details exactly why children play in the first place. So on that note, enjoy the rest of your session.